Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this Techstrong Learning web class brought to you by Techstrong. We are here to talk about some marketing tips today. And before I turn things over to our host, I do want to review just a couple of housekeeping notes. First off, today's session is being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with our panel today, which I really hope that you do, you can do so using a couple of options on the right side of the screen. The first of which is the chat tab. So I'd like you to start warming that up for us right now by letting us know maybe what role you play in your organization, or maybe if you just want to let us know from where you're joining in, that's just as good. Want to make sure that that chat tab is working. If you do have any questions for us, we want you to direct those specifically to the Q&A tab. That will just help us keep track of them, and so we can answer all of those. And if you do jump over to that handouts tab, you'll see there are a couple of resources there for you. One is a link to contact us, and another is a survey for this program. So just feel free to click on those and let us know your thoughts after we conclude. But our conversation today is called The Marketing Informer, Making Your Next Virtual Event More Effective. I'm joined by Gina Kowalik, Senior Director of Field Marketing at Tricentis, Sydney Milligan, Senior Demand Marketing Manager at Sneak, Genevieve Cross, Senior Director of Demand Generation at StackState, and keeping this train on the tracks today is our very own Matthew Delman, Director of Marketing here at Techstrong Group. So Gina, Sydney, and Genevieve, thank you all so much for joining me today. Matthew, do you want to go ahead and get this conversation kicked off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cody, for that wonderful lead-in. So obviously kind of the genesis of this conversation today and just a little bit of a preview of what we're talking about. Virtual events have kind of been all of the demand generation's bread and butter since the COVID-19 pandemic. And now as things are starting to open up and we're starting to see a little bit more attendance at in-person conferences, virtual events are still a component of a marketing strategy, but obviously there's a discussion in the community about how to really drive the virtual event forward and how to make them ultimately more effective as part of your lead or demand generation. So thank you very much to my panelists for joining me on this conversation, all of whom are far more experienced at running virtual events than I am. So they are definitely, please learn from them. Please take notes if you feel like it. And obviously we will be sharing this recording later as well. So to start it off, kind of the big question here is, have you seen continued success with hosting virtual events as more in-person conferences have started?
Who do you want to answer that question, Matt?
Who wants to answer the question first? Genevieve, since you talked first.
Yeah. All right. So Matt, absolutely. So virtual events are, like, as you mentioned, are a key component of the, demand generation strategy that, you leverage. I mean, speaking for myself, I try to leverage multiple different channels. And and also you need to take in consideration your target audience. Like, how do they want to consume content? And usually the more formats that you offer and multiple different ways of providing that content, the better off you're going to be and more successful you are. So virtual events are definitely, one that we do use. I would say, from looking forward, like our strategy and also what we've done in the past, since COVID is we host webinars, multiple different formats. Like one could be a thought leadership webinar, where we are, reporting out on, different results of surveys that we've done. Or we also host, workshops and like product demos to really help educate our audience. But one thing I would say that is a common thread amongst all of them, Matt, is make sure that it's educational content.
Okay. So it's more informational, more like actual actual something where the attendee is going to learn something then.
Absolutely. So we tried to save those sales pitches and, from, or tried to save our target audience from any sales pitches.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Let's see. Dina, are you still getting success in your virtual events over at Tricentis?
Yeah, we are. I would say that, of course, all of our worlds were rocked when COVID hit. We, at the time, were doing mostly in-person events and then some webinars, like Genevieve just spoke about. And when in-person all got canceled, we shifted a lot to doing virtual lunch and learns, virtual wine tastings. And we have seen such success with those that they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I don't know if it's just me, but our audience likes to learn, I would say, at home, and then they like to network in person is what we're learning. So we're really trying to find, well, I guess, one of the main things for our virtual events is all about who are we targeting? Why are we speaking on this topic and who is interested in it? And then doing micro segments by topic is really cool, where when we were in person, it was more like, where are we? And it was always a much broader topic for everyone. And we are seeing with our audience that they really like the more micro segmenting. But we are starting to play going back in person. But with that said, those virtual things are just consistent, and they drive our numbers from leads and even the quality leads that we're driving. That I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. And I think they're here to stay.
Okay. Awesome. Yes, Sydney.
Just to echo what both of my colleagues have already said here, I think virtual events are not going anywhere. On the demand front, I led webinars for years before COVID even happened. So I think webinars will always be a key part of demand strategy. What I do find really exciting that COVID kind of challenged us to think about more and think about differently is how we can creatively get people engaged on these virtual events. So, wine tasting events, different activities on events. So like having a character drawer, drawing characters of people, just something different, a different flavor to keep people engaged and to stay on throughout. I think one thing that we noticed during the pandemic is that, everyone had to shift to virtual. So things got pretty noisy pretty quickly. So I think any way that you could stand out was a huge opportunity.
Okay. Now that has always struck me as something interesting. The engagement tactics. Like let's dive in a little bit deeper on this. Like a virtual wine tasting. Like that's always something, like, because I've been to wine tastings and been completely lost in understanding. It's like, yes, this is wine. How does like a virtual wine tasting work?
Yeah, I can talk to that. We do a ton of those. So we actually have a sommelier that we partner with, and she lives up in Boston, and she hand selects 3 bottles of wine for each of our wine tastings. And then for the first 20 minutes, so we make sure that those get sent before the webinar, so everyone has their wine in hand. And then for the first 20 minutes, she walks everyone through a nice tasting. And when we're doing these wine tasting, one thing to note is they're not open to the public. I mean, 3 bottles of wine is quite a lot. So these are all targeted towards our, kind of director and above are really our buyers and the people that are going to be buying our software. And then after the 20 minutes of getting everyone a little loose, everyone kind of, we found that it sometimes virtually, like it's hard to bridge the gap of getting people to start interacting and talking. And that's what really leads to successful conversations, when people are engaged, asking questions, not when someone's just presenting at them, which, by the way, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat for us. And so that's how we kind of run those virtual wine events, and we have them just turnkey that we can rinse and repeat, and we're doing them at least once a month now on different topics.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So yes.
I mean, to add to that, I mean, I think like definitely doing like the wine tastings and, getting really creative is one way to drive engagement. But also I think there's like the tried and true tactics, with a webinar, like doing polls actually does really work. It might be boring, but still, I think it's a great way to get the audience engaged, have them actually provide their input, and then having the speakers, leverage the actual polling results in the actual topics, and to talk to it. I find those help out a lot.
Okay, which is good. Unfortunately, we did not come up with any polls today, so we didn't take our own advice in this particular point.
Next time, Matt. Next time.
Next one. Next question, really from here is, as we're talking about engagement and we're talking about new engagement strategies, with having to get creative in terms of building engagement, has the actual, like, obviously that's something where now are we at the point where just a standard, if anything standard, a standard virtual summit or a standard webinar just isn't enough? You have to do more to retain attention for one of these. Sydney.
Yeah, I think going back to a point that I think Gina made earlier is that we now have the ability to target a really specific audience with a really specific topic. So I do think, traditional virtual events still have a place in this virtual world when you have that really impactful content and you get the audience right. And, I think a lot of us have seen behavioral change for registrations for these virtual events as well, is that if you have that audience right and the topic right, people will register for that content. And even if they don't attend, they're still engaging with it on demand. So I think that's been a big game changer in this kind of like new virtual world.
Or even something to add there, Sydney, is we then learned about a topic they're interested in, and maybe we're serving them up if they didn't want to join, the 30-minute, hour-long webinar, maybe they do want to read that ebook or that blog post, which are all great things that we can use that information to then target them in other ways.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is this something then that you'd say with webinars, you're not, with virtual events, you're less looking for number and you're more looking for like specific targeted interest level, basically?
I would say, that with the virtual events is that you're being very targeted. I mean, always, at least for me, is looking more for quality over quantity. I mean, because there's no reason to put just like a volume of people's contact information into your database. You actually want to make sure that you have the right individuals. So having the right target audience and the right topic that is of interest, that is educational, I think is always a win.
And this might be a little bit of a hot take, and it could show my experience from the companies I was at the stage and pre and post pandemic. But, in the past, before the pandemic, I was at a company where we had a webinar strategy that was, let's just get the numbers in. And I think, having the pandemic and virtual becoming such a main mode of demand for a lot of organizations, there really was this fine tooth comb that got added to say, hey, like, we can't just be getting the unwashed masses from virtual events anymore. We need these leads to be highly qualified and ready to go into the buying cycle rather than just leads that we're putting into our database to nurture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I think for us, at least, our strategy still includes a mix. We do have some webinars that are more thought leadership. I think of them more as like top of funnel type webinars or even virtual events. And then we have the content that's middle of funnel, bottom of funnel, where we're even doing things like demos. So I think it's also having different things going on that can, bring in the quantity and then tighten it up so that when we're handing them off to sales, they're actually ready to have a conversation. And it gets complicated because, you need to balance it all out, and especially when you're targeting different people. But I do think that that's really important to be successful in the virtual world.
I do.
Have you guys how has sales reacted in general to this work, to this new targeting? Has that been a net positive overall?
So I struggle with that one a little bit, and I'd love to hear from you, Genevieve and Sydney. Is internally, my team struggles, I would say, to get the same excitement and buzz when it's virtual. For example, even we just ran our Vision Summit, which used to be during COVID, a virtual only like full day event. And when we did it, it was really hard to even get our presenters excited and everything. So this year we actually ran it in person in front of a small live audience just to get the presenters and people internally like excited about this event. Because when it's all virtual, it's even hard to get internal excitement. That was one little trick that we did this year that we will 100% do again for like a full day virtual event. But then with sales on like actually handing off the leads, that's where I think what I was just talking about of the importance of like, when is the lead ready for sales's eyes as like a required follow-up versus when is there a list where they can go through and cherry pick who they want to follow up with, and having really good processes and communication with those. Because I have seen periods where we've just sent everything over and that gets everything a bad reputation. And then sales is not going to be happy about, or, they'll just have a negative thought about the virtual events, where if you're only handing off, and requiring follow-up on the people that are actually ready. And one tip that we do also is in any of our webinars, we ask for the hand raisers. We ask for people who want more information and we flag those people. So even if it's a top of funnel topic, we're giving them the chance to raise their hand and say, hey, I want to talk to a human about XYZ. And we flag those in our system as like, must follow up with this one.
I actually think it depends on what type of virtual event it is. At least, for my experience here at Stack State, I mean, if it is a large, like multi-day or even a one-day virtual event where you have like multiple topics, multiple speakers, I do think, and I agree with you, Gina, that it's really hard to get the sales organization to be excited about those. I mean, especially when I just came back from KubeCon in Amsterdam, and the sales team, as well as also even our engineers, were so excited to be at KubeCon, and we had a great event. And it's really hard to replicate, that in-person experience where you can actually shake a person's hand or look somebody eye to eye and talk to them. But depending on if it is a webinar that we're sponsoring, on our own with a partner like with Techstrong Group, or if we're hosting a webinar or a product demo or even a workshop on our own, I know that at least the sales organization at Stack State, they absolutely love the leads that are coming in for the webinar, and we actually get really good traction from them. But Gina, I agree with you 110% that we shouldn't be passing all those leads over. Using, like the lead scoring methodologies, or looking at, who is the right target audience, what industry they're in, what size of the organization is, the titles, using the demographic and firmographic information in order to determine who should be passed over. And also even, going back to the polling question. Yes, Cody, I know you like polls. But like using the polls results, as well as also, the feedback and whether or not they want to be want to be followed up on, like using all that information and providing it to the sales team so they can actually help continue that conversation that occurred like during that virtual event.
Yeah, just 2 points I want to add on to that, Genevieve, that we've seen as well is one is around just creating excitement around these virtual events too. So going back to your point earlier as well, Gina, we found that once we can get a little bit of success with these virtual events, we try to blow it up really big and like make it really loud so that the sales team sees like, hey, we're getting opportunities from these types of events. It's definitely worth your time to be looking into it. And the second point that I wanted to make as well is around MQL scoring. I think, I don't know if this is unique just to my current organization, but we've started to get even more stringent on our MQL scoring to make sure that the leads we're passing over to our sales teams are qualified and ready to be followed up with and contacted. So I think as we're continuing to get more stringent and leverage some AI tools as well as learning when the SDRs are going through those leads and saying, hey, this one actually wasn't ready to follow up. This one is not a buyer. Our systems are getting smarter and smarter so that we're passing over, the hottest and best leads to the team.
Awesome. So with that, obviously do agree the energy and excitement of in-person is hard. It's very difficult to do in virtual events. I guess, let's see, kind of the next question here, even though we're including virtual events in their overall demand generation marketing strategies, are you doing fewer of them? Do you find yourselves doing fewer of them overall? Like we talked about greater targeting, but does that ultimately kind of reduce the number of virtual events that you're actually trying to do throughout the year?
We're personally doing more than ever. We're kind of in a growth stage company too. So like our team's expanding, our products are expanding. So that might be unique to us, but yeah, I would say we're doing more than ever. And once again, that's just because they're working and they're scalable and they're not in place anymore of in-person events. We're also going to those, but they're not going to go anywhere for us, and they are growing.
Yeah, and I would agree with Gina, Matt, that it's not that we're doing less. We're definitely not doing less virtual events. I think, at least from my standpoint, is I'm being more strict on making sure that the topic or the target audience is spot on, for Stack State, to making sure that we're investing our marketing budget in the right areas. But we've been doing in person as well as also virtual events, for the last year and a half. So it's not like anything different has occurred.
I would say, what's interesting is when COVID started, it was kind of like we were then dabbling in virtual. Now I feel like we've like more fine-tuned it. And like you said, Genevieve, we're kind of like, figuring out what works and then lasering in on that. Where now we're dabbling with in person because we're finding it's a lot less consistent. I don't know about you guys, but we go sponsor a show these days and I can't even use our pre-COVID numbers, and even things that we sponsored, in the fall in 2022 they're different this year. And we're not exactly sure what it's going to be like until we're actually there in person, whether we're sponsoring or hosting ourselves.
Yeah.
It is interesting how it's been slower to come back on the in-person events side, I would say, because we're also being like picky and choosy about the in-person events that we go to. But Gina couldn't agree more on the piece around the metrics, right? Like no in-person event, like you can't look back at benchmarks from the last years to know like what you're actually going to expect from these events from an ROI standpoint. So it is really tough from a planning perspective.
It is. I at least for the last, I think it was like last quarter, I sponsored three events, one of which was AWS reInvent. And, you tried to take a guess of, how many attendees are actually going to be there. And then you use like a calculation to determine like how many visitors are going to come by your own booth. I found my numbers in some cases were spot on. And then the others were, they weren't quite where it should be at. But what I was really happy with is, from KubeCon standpoint, it blew my estimations or my guesstimations out of the water about how many attendees or how many attendees we got. So it was fantastic. From a virtual event side, though, I still see that we still, like we were been talking about, if the topic is spot on, you do get the registrations. Maybe you might not get as many like attendees in person, but from what I've been seeing, it's been like a pretty solid 30% attendee rate, like across the board. And then, but also even if they register and they don't attend, but they watch it on demand, I still find that they're a good lead.
Yeah. So we do have an audience question that I'd actually like to ask here. Someone had brought up one of the big challenges in webinars and virtual events is audio. So things like background noise, like a dog barking or losing audio, or the speaker sits in a room that has a bad reverb without a wired mic. How do you account for that with your virtual events, with your webinars? What are you doing? Are you making sure everyone has a good mic, or?
I'm feeling a little insecure.
Yeah, so many tricks up our sleeves.
Well, and you can add one, a dog chewing on the post of my desk. So I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I was trying to stop it.
But I also think it's normal now for imperfections to happen. Like even I got on here, my cat was behind me and I was like, oh, should I move? And I was like, no, you know what? This is my life. I think I enjoy seeing into people's lives, seeing their real background, seeing their animals, hearing a kid come into the video. Like I feel like that has gotten normalized over COVID. And I personally am here for it and love it. Yes, nothing is worse than when someone's audio is cutting in and out. That is not ideal. I mean, you can do all the tests in the world and that stuff can still happen. And that's unfortunate. For our really big shows, like where we have multiple hundreds of people, well, usually actually like thousands of people on them, we cheat. We do mock live. We pre-record them and then we have the speaker there for the Q&A. And I wish we didn't have to do that. I wish the technology was reliable enough. But when you're not in a studio, not able to control it, it's just personally not a risk I am willing to take. And then for, I think everyone's understanding if something goes wrong. We're all human.
Yeah, I actually think it makes it more authentic, like Gina, Matt, and Sydney. When something does go wrong, it's like, we're not all perfect. And, and to make it seem like we have everything is perfect, it's unrealistic. But to your question, Matt, what I've seen done like really, really well in the past and trying to like, and I call this, and I think I mentioned it even before this webinar, is like with any event, whether it's in person or online or virtual, is that you have to practice a fail fast mentality. Something is going to go wrong and you just need to make the best out of it. So in order to minimize something failing fast is, in previous organizations, we actually sent out a kit to them. So that has like a light, speakers, the webcam, just to make sure that everything is high quality. You want the speakers to look good. You want the audio to be well, and you want to minimize those factors that you cannot control. But now the dog chewing, on something, you can't control that. But it's I think there's ways around it. But then again, if something does go wrong,
what is it? Murphy's Law, right? Something will always go wrong. Even when I've done pre-recorded events or the mock live and kind of fake it in the past, we've still had issues where the recording doesn't start on time. And we're like, well, everyone's just sitting in a room waiting for the content to begin. But I agree. I think some of it does humanize people. And I love that COVID has brought people closer in that way. And you can kind of see into people's life so more. And, I think it is in a good way. But to second what Genevieve said, we also do send out speaker kits for some of those bigger events that I've helped with in the past, where we're sending the ring light, we're sending the green screen, we're sending the mic, just to make sure we cross all the T's and dot the I's and control what we can at least.
Yeah. That's funny. Gina mentions everyone at home. You can see Gina's cat behind her on the couch if you look carefully.
Yes. I can grab my dog, but I'll leave her down there. She's sleeping.
Yeah. No, the only one, for fairness, the only one who has a virtual background right now is me, and that's just because you don't need to see what's behind me.
You need to get the virtual dog to sit on the seat.
Yeah, virtual dog to sit on the seat. Yes, I also have a dog who likes to make noise. So that's kind of, we talked about audio. We're talking a little bit about background. Are there standards that you want to have, like when you're doing the big events? Are you sending everyone like the same background to have as their speaker, or are you having standards that you're trying to enforce?
Yeah, I think it comes down to variations, because you don't want everything to seem so cookie cutter. So there's a virtual event that I worked on in the past, right when COVID hit, that was supposed to be a 3-day in-person conference, and we turned it all virtual. So we had a strategy where we gave people options. So there's a couple of different types of virtual backgrounds that they could use. And we had a really rigid process of doing all sorts of sound checks, camera checks, all of those things to make sure that everything in the background look perfect. So if they opted to not use a virtual background to bring a little bit more of their personality, we were talking them through about the things that needed to move. And as I'm looking, I'm like, this camera could probably be positioned better. But we were walking them through all of those kinds of things to make sure the background really like fit the whole kind of like vibe, if you will, of the conference, without being like too personal, but too rigid.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And also, Matt, like, and not in my current organization, but in my past organization, we would hire like an external producer that actually would help. And, so when we used to do, so when I was at Cloudbees and we did DevOps World online, when we had to switch to online, we used Fox Dogs out of the Boston area. So they did a really, really good job helping, and also to provide consistency.
Absolutely.
We do as well, especially for the big ones. The webinars we host in person ourselves, but we use a company named ETA in Atlanta for all of our production with the big guys.
Mm-hmm.
I would be curious to see a model where someone doesn't use a producer, because we have to rely heavily on their input and expertise to be able to record and cut and make sure that everything fits together correctly. So
you would have to have a video in-house
a
person.
whole team.
Yeah.
You would.
Really.
This is the one aspect of like virtual events that I'm talking about, like doing like bigger like virtual events online. I actually think requires a heck of a lot more like coordination, planning, making sure like Jean was mentioning, and Sydney, recording these sessions like way in advance, cutting them. It requires a lot more heavy lifting in the very beginning. What I kind of like about the live events is that you just go for it, and it's not so much planning. But also, but even also like in person events, like when you actually have a booth and everything, still that planning still happens way in advance, but it's just a little bit different.
Yeah. One thing we haven't even touched on at this point, and Genevieve and Gina, I'm not sure if you guys have done these for your virtual summits as well, but for previous companies that I worked at, our self-hosted virtual summits, we also did them in 3 time zones. So you were awake almost around the clock, and people were taking shifts to make sure that this virtual summit went on correctly. So that's a whole
I'm waiting for a platform to solve that one.
Yeah. Right.
Biggest headache.
Totally.
Yeah.
But, they're early on in the pandemic, there was no other way. Like some of us were taking shifts to be awake for the APJ version of the summit. And some people were up really early to make sure that we had chat monitors and all sorts of things for the EMEA summit as well. So that's a whole nother can of worms when it comes to hosting these virtual summits too.
And like one point that we didn't bring up, like for engagement, especially with the bigger virtual events, is leveraging social media in order to like talk about the event. I mean, the pre, but also post and during, like highlighting, various different presenters, the topics, and kind of like getting people online to help participate in the discussion. And I think it works really well. And talking about ones that are going through multiple different time zones, I used to work with one colleague, and she would be up a really really early in the morning and really, really late at night, to make sure she covers all the different time zones. So,
Matt, I'm curious. I have a question for the other panelists here today, and sorry if this maybe derails us a little bit. I'm curious, Genevieve, you mentioned a social media strategy. Curious if either one of you have ever also streamed like your main keynote sessions through LinkedIn Live or something of that nature, YouTube Live functionality, to try to generate more interest in the events.
I've seen it work really, really successfully. I have not done it personally. I was going to do one via LinkedIn Live, but I find, at least initially when I was checking it out, that like the streaming software that you actually need to buy in addition to it, I was just like, oh, there's way too many moving parts. Forget this. So I have not done it, but we have streamed, like in past organizations, we have streamed keynotes.
Yeah, same here. We have not done it on social media. We always do it on the site. We have, and then we try to put stuff behind a form just so we can actually like understand who's watching, what they're doing. We're like very numbers focused company, and like that's a big reason why we do these. but we do usually make one of the main keynotes not behind a form, so anyone can watch it, and then everything else is behind a form. But we've talked about it, just haven't done it.
I think that's the hard part, is like form fill or no form fill, right?
Yeah.
Like you want people to be interested, but you also want to capture that lead info.
Mm-hmm.
What have you done, Sydney? Have you used LinkedIn Live or done it?
Yeah, I've done a mix of both in the past. I think when we had the in-person events, so rather than virtual, it was really common for us to stream our keynotes online because, if the event was in EMEA, it's restrictive to who can actually get there. Same for EMEA. I think as we've gone virtual, we've started to be interested in LinkedIn Live and those other things. But again, it's that whole question of, do we put this behind a gate or not? So we're still questioning it as well.
I actually think it depends on the target audience. I mean, so for StackState, we're really designed for developers and engineers, so trying to be more community friendly. So with that in mind, I'm actually toying with the idea of taking down like all forms in its entirety. And I know it's risky, but
yeah, developers do not like forms. We run into that as well, but unfortunately, our exec team and board does.
nah, I get it, 110%, Gina. There's that fine line because I'm like, I should just
sales.
sales
likes it.
Yeah.
Yep.
No.
Yeah. It was prior to joining Techstrong, I was an in-house marketer for a cybersecurity vendor. And yes, cybersecurity vendors, as Sydney will say, cybersecurity targets also do not like forms. They will find there's always that one person who fills something out and then will share the link out on Reddit as well, their link. The number of times that happened with threat research. And that's always, how do you have that conversation then with your senior executives where you have to go, yes, I understand you want the leads, but we can't actually control this.
Yep.
So that's always the problem. But also, that's not the real question that I wanted to ask. So how do you handle so say you've got your virtual event, you've got your speakers, everything's all set, and then one of your speakers doesn't show or shows up in such a way that they are not actually in a state where they can reliably speak. How do you account for that?
Well, in a larger event environment, Matt, since it is being like pre-recorded, you can always change the recording date if there is wiggle room to do that. If it's more of like a webinar that you're doing live and something happens, hopefully you can just roll with it and leverage that fail fast mentality. I mean, because we've had I think it was like last June, we had a webinar that we were hosting and we were going over our observability survey results. Actually, it was with the Techstrong Group. And so we had one of our customers who, you can't plan for this. I mean, and it's still like heavily COVID days, and he came down with COVID. So he wasn't in any shape or form to actually present or speak. Luckily, we had, a couple other still panelists that were able to, answer questions, and the show still went on, I should say. So it was fine. Now, if you only have one speaker, that'll be a little bit different. Hopefully you get a backup person.
Yeah, you scramble. I mean, it happens at live events too. I just had it happen the other week where a speaker was MIA. He was supposed to be walking on stage, and you know what? We put the other person first. We just swapped the two sessions. We had to make a call, and we did it virtually. Same thing. We might scramble and start 10 minutes late and find a replacement speaker that can just join on in a pinch. Might have to make the decision to cancel. It just depends. But that's one thing that is just part of being in the event world, is whether you're sponsoring and you're on a booth and internet doesn't show up, like sometimes you just have to think on your feet and make the best of the situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a really interesting experience with this recently, which is unfortunate. Fortunate. I think the biggest thing is team mentality. So we were hosting a virtual summit, and this was at Sneak, and we have a really great technical team who is like all hands in. Whatever needs to get done, they'll make sure it gets done. We had a speaker lose their laptop the evening before a presentation, and they were running a technical presentation. So like needed the software on the computer, couldn't just use a backup laptop. But we were able to get someone up to speed within like 12 hours so that they could lead this virtual workshop that was a part of a virtual summit. So I think that having everyone bought in on these events is really important too. But fail fast and have backups.
Yeah. I even had one time, I think it was last summer, that one of my colleagues, he was actually doing a technical demonstration, and the platform, I did not realize, did not support Linux. And so they were trying to join. I was trying to fix it. I'm like, I'm sorry, you are not using that laptop to join this webinar. So we did something else. I had one of my other colleagues actually do the demo.
Awesome. Back to what Genevieve said, something will always go wrong in some capacity. We were having that conversation before this started. Fail fast, fail quickly, keep going. And the last event planner, the third most stressful job in the world, is something.
Only the third?
only the third. That's noted on that. I think everyone here would agree. So this question is admittedly a little bit self-serving on here. In terms of hosting your virtual events, are you finding greater success with a third-party provider, or are you finding greater success with trying to host and promote through your own channels, through your own communities?
Yeah, I think it's I think there's a place for both, right? Because I think when we're, at least at Sneak, when we're hosting our own like homegrown webinars, that's more of our middle of the funnel content, right? We've got people that have come into us through maybe a Techstrong webinar or some sort of other form fill, and we're trying to nurture those leads with more product-centric content, more technical content. So I think that they really do live together and not separately. So I think there has to be a strategy for both.
Second that. Yep, both.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I think they do live together, and I think they both solve for a purpose. I know that at Stack State we've hosted many successful virtual events, with the Techstrong Group, as well as also other third parties. But then also we host our own. Now, me personally, I love it when I use an organization like the Techstrong Group, because it takes a little bit of the pressure of making sure that everything is going smoothly, because you have Cody and Jared, on your team, Matt, who do an amazing job. But like when we're doing it on our own, it's I'm the wizard, behind the screen, making sure that everything is going smoothly.
It's so nice to not have to push the button, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We also find, like, especially getting new people into our system, like those third party, I view like the ones we're hosting ourselves are nurturing current people already in our database, where when we go and pay a third party, it's just a bit of a different goal. Like we're looking for new people that might not recognize and trust the Tricentis name, but maybe know and trust the Techstrong brand. And then, because of that recognition, then they learn about Tricentis and then they trust us. So that, as well as, not having to do as much on our team ourselves in terms of like production. Also, we really love when our third party vendors some of them have really cool targeting and segmenting capabilities where we can get laser specific on like, hey, this webinar, we're focusing on these 40 titles, companies that are this big in this industry, in this region. So sometimes you can get really specific there. And that is like our favorite, because then we're just paying for the leads that we really want versus, kind of partnering with someone who is just like, you get whatever you get.
Cool.
Oh, or one more thing on that is sometimes third-party vendors do like a lead guarantee. So we actually know the price per lead. Some third-party vendors do it as like, it's just a webinar, you get whatever it is. So it just depends, and you have to know and ask those questions when you're evaluating different third parties to partner with.
Awesome. Okay. So we have 15 minutes left in our conversation today. Let's see.
I've got a question, Matt, if you
Yes.
don't. One of the things we struggle with is I feel like we've all got down creating content, presenting it to people. And I've played with this in so many different variations, but when you're hosting an event, has anyone successfully doing the networking piece? Like that kills me, as virtually like I have not figured out a way to make it collaborative and networking virtually. And that's the part that like now that we're back in person, it's like, okay, I'm learning. We really need to lean into that piece. And we're doing that in person by doing more like roundtable type discussions instead of just like presenting at people like we do, because we can do that virtually. And I'm wondering if anyone here, whether it's a panelist or someone listening, has cracked that on allowing for people to virtually network. And maybe we just need, VR or something to actually get there, but we've not discovered a good way to do that.
I think that it's like I have participated in some like larger virtual events that actually have tried, to have like a networking lounge like online where you can go in and ask some questions and meet other people. But I really still think, there's some things that cannot be replicated in like online that you do in person naturally. And that that is one. However, like with webinars that we've actually hosted or, the speakers provide like their LinkedIn QR code where they can connect with that particular person online and then, network with them after the fact. I mean, we have done that really successfully. I mean, and done it well. But and also I've also have had like other virtual events that we have hosted where we provided like a kind of like a music, our session afterwards, or like jamming out to music. I still don't think I think it adds like an element of fun, but I still think it's hard to do, Gina. Sydney, have you had any luck?
No, I was just going to add, I think it, even still, we've been in this kind of virtual world for years now. It still kind of feels like the first day of school sometimes, where it's like a little uncomfortably like, hi, like my name is Sydney and I want to connect with you, which sounds so strange because LinkedIn has been a thing for so long. We've been behind these screens for 3 years now in a pandemic. But yeah, it's just kind of like that uncomfortability of reaching out, I think, to other people that we still tend to fight. And there, I haven't found a good way to foster some networking as a part of virtual events yet. But curious if anyone in the chat has as well.
If you solve that, let us know.
Yeah.
One thing I have actually seen, which we've never played with ourselves, is our investors' insights. They ask a few questions and say like, hey, do you want to be connected with someone in like a similar industry and field on one of these topics? And if so, like fill out this for your availability, what you're interested, who you're interested in connecting with. And then they connect you with someone and that's like one-on-one. We've never done that, but I have seen those be successful. Is one idea maybe to play with that I've thought about just bandwidth wise. We've never played with that. And it's so one-to-one. Like, I wonder if that could be recreated in more of like a group, but then also it's a little scary because then you kind of lose the control aspect and, how much control versus not control, would you want over something like that? But that's kind of an idea that I have actually seen, just haven't done myself.
And I mean, and now that you were thinking, Gina, I mean, one thing that has worked really well, at least from a virtual event standpoint, where if we know like who is going to be at that event, is reaching out to them via LinkedIn beforehand, inviting them to actually attend our session, and then setting up a meeting with them like after the fact, to answer any questions that they may have, or even if they want to, have a one-on-one session, with the actual speaker. So we have had success like with that, but still it does not go back to your original question, like actually like in the event platform, like networking.
Yeah, it's a great point. As you both were speaking, I had a moment come back to my brain where I was invited to a virtual speed dating event with other women in marketing. And I had totally committed to go. I was like, this is cool. Like, I want to see how this works. Like, what would a virtual speed dating event look like? And then I got that virtual event jitters where I was like, oh, like, I don't want to have to get on camera and try to introduce myself to people 10 times over the course of an hour, or, whatever it might be. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the introvert of the group that is scared of networking virtually.
Well, this has me thinking now. I'm like, I think there's maybe something here, like round table type style.
It might be. That might be. I have seen some larger conferences use dedicated Slack channels or Slack workspaces.
Actually, that has worked out well. And I have seen success with that.
Yeah, that's about the only one that I can think of where I've actually seen successful networking in a digital sense.
Yeah.
Have another audience question. I'm a little bit surprised it took this long to get to this topic. Generative AI. Do we, based on your experience and kind of as we've looked at it and as things like ChatGPT has basically eaten the world, is there a sense that these tools are going to disruptively impact the marketing, content, or even the AV side of events in the future, like near term, medium term?
Yeah, we're all here for it. Everything's going to disrupt everything. It's like the cell phone was, before. It's going to change the way we do business and how we do things.
Like, if it can make presenters get their decks in on time, I'm here for it too, right? Like, that's always one of the things that's so hard with virtual events is, as an event planner, you're constantly chasing down speakers to get these decks. If you can use AI to at least get a starting point, I'm here for that for sure.
Oh, and I think it would enhance. I don't think it detracts, like using AI or anything like that. So, do I think right now it's going to replace, doing everything? No, not at all. But I think it helps.
Awesome. Next question. How do you differentiate your in-person events from your virtual events if both of them are educationally focused in terms of like content or topics?
Yeah, we really lean into like the networking aspect, the getting face time with people. We try to, create like those roundtable type discussions and like networking opportunities at the in-person stuff, where virtually, just because we haven't found a good way to do it, it's mostly being presented at or a small group, where people can ask questions, but, it just depends on the group. But that's where we're leaning in for our in-person versus our virtual.
Sydney, do you want to go next?
No, go ahead.
All right. So for in person, at least a couple weeks ago when I was at KubeCon, like what we did a little bit differently is that in order to have some fun and also still have that educational component, is we came up with like what we called is like the Stack State KubeCon challenge, where people came into our booth. We have like an online playground that they can use our product or our solution, and they had to go through and they had to answer we had like 6 different challenges for them to take and do in person. And I only told them they had to do 3, but everyone who was there at the booth was like, no, Genevieve, we're doing all 6. If 6 is on the list, we're doing all 6. I'm like, okay, but and then we made it kind of fun where they actually entered to win, something that was a high ticketed like item, like a PS5 or something like that on the daily prize. Now, because it was so successful in person, we are planning on doing the same thing, but doing like in a workshop type of environment. So I do think there's some elements that you could do like in person to help drive that engagement, or that can transcend, or you can try, to transcend it like also online. But so that's what we're planning on doing.
Yeah, to Genevieve's point, we've tried kind of a mix of both, where we have virtual activities that we've done, like kind of like virtual hackathons, as well as capture the flags, where we try to relate them to in-person events as well. So I think it's a back and forth for sure. I will say the hackathons always get a lot of interest because we do some really fun prizes for those. So, if people are finding and fixing vulnerabilities, they're getting points for all of those that they fix. It's a little bit of a bonus if we can get them into the Snyk product to fix those vulnerabilities. So they're getting more familiar with Snyk. But yeah, I think those are definitely some interest drivers that are a little bit virtual, but in person.
Absolutely. Okay. So we are in the last 4 minutes of our conversation. I would like to, first of all, start by thanking everyone who attended and whoever has been here, coming in, coming out, what have you. Thank you so much to my esteemed panelists who, again, are much smarter than me at virtual event planning. So that's really why I invited them on. And then, thank you. Please remember, as we're wrapping up, if we don't have any additional questions from the audience, from my panelists, please fill out the survey that Cody just helpfully put in the handout area. And obviously get in touch with Techstrong Group for all of your virtual event needs. This is why the hosting provider question, why I said it was self-serving.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy and Gina.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. Bye.